Welcome back to the channel. So today we're finally going to discuss Trudeau's resignation from earlier this week. I could have made this video sooner, but I decided to wait a few days to see what developments would shake out after such a surprising announcement. Not that it was surprising in the sense that no one saw this coming, but rather that the narcissist actually announced his resignation in the first place. This announcement also came with the declaration of a prorogation of Parliament, which is a bit of a mixed bag of good news and bad news. Now, first things first, the good news. Prorogation means that all active bills, committees, and other ongoing activities at Parliament are completely shut down. So, among other things, this means that bills going through their readings in the Senate or the House are completely dead. They're gone, donezo. Most important of these to go under was probably Bill C-63. C-63 was a bill clearly and intentionally aimed at destroying even the illusion of free speech in Canada, and this prorogation all but guarantees that it'll never happen. As for gun owners and the Buyback program, it's good and bad news there. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not the government can still use their OIC powers, and Danielle Fritter from Caliber Mag says that they won't be able to, but then the CCFR, in their most recent podcast, episode 180, said that the government could still use their OIC powers.
The big question is, does the prorogation stop the government from filing orders in council?
No.
No.
No. No, that's the bad news.
So, which is it? Well, the CCFR actually offers no rationale for their reasoning, but Caliber Mag does. And the short version of what he essentially says is that OICs are actually run through the Treasury Board Committee, and that prorogation halts all committee work. But that's not technically true. Prorogation suspends Parliament. It doesn't suspend Cabinet, and the Treasury Board is a Cabinet committee. We often like to think of Parliament as the government, but strictly speaking that's not really true, and that'll become extremely relevant later on in this video here. However, even during a prorogation, there are a few committees in the Senate and the House of Commons which do remain active. And that being said, the Treasury Board does not exist in either the Senate or the House of Commons. It exists in Cabinet and consists of the Ministers of Cabinet. Being that it's not a part of Parliament, it ought to continue to function, and therefore the OIC power continues to function. And Section 30 of the Financial Administration Act even implies that the Treasury Board continues to function even during times when Parliament is prorogued. So, in a very rare instance for once here, I think Caliber Mag might actually be wrong about this one. I mean, it's either that or the CCFR is wrong. But, like I always say, I am no lawyer, and parliamentary law is well outside of my normal purview, so I could certainly be wrong here. But it feels weird that the CCFR would be the ones to get this wrong, especially since they would have lawyers on call to clear this up for them if need be. But it also feels weird that Caliber Mag would be wrong since he's usually out here batting 1,000. So, I don't know. If you do need extra confirmation either way, check the Gazette in a couple of weeks to see if there are any new regulations that have been published. As far as the buyback specifically goes, there is better news on that front. As recently as December 10th in the Senate, Public Safety Canada was still trying to acquire funds for Phase 2 of their buyback program. And most notably, they were still quibbling over a mere $35 million for a program which realistic estimates place at around $7 to $10 billion in order to implement.
Public safety is asking for $32 million in supplementary estimates B, and it's to, as I mentioned at the beginning remarks, it's to continue with the phase 2 of the assault-style firearms compensation program for individuals. Public safety's responsibilities are basically to establish the policy, get the system ready, marketing, communication, notification, etc.
So, if they're still asking for money in the millions to help begin a program that is in the billions, you can certainly bet they don't have those billions yet either. And I'm not well versed in parliamentary matters, especially not when it comes to financial matters and issues of supply bills or appropriation bills or whatever else would be needed here. But if you recall in the 2024 budget, there was a mere $30 million earmarked for the buyback program. So odds are the money just isn't ready, and they need Parliament to get this money ready. And Parliament can't do anything during a prorogation. So odds are there will never be a phase 2 of the buyback program. However, this assumes that Parliament will dissolve shortly after they return on March 24th. Upon the resumption of Parliament, there is what's called a speech from the throne, signaling a new session of Parliament. And immediately after the throne speech is the address in reply, which is a confidence motion. So on the very day that Parliament resumes, Parliament can be dissolved by a non-confidence motion and an election can be called. The Conservatives and the Bloc have already committed to such actions in the past, but the NDP was always the holdout, propping up the Liberal government. However, Jagmeet has finally publicly and formally announced that he will be voting non-confidence in the Liberals upon their return. And apparently it doesn't even matter to him at all who was in charge at the time. His issue is with the Liberals themselves, not just Trudeau.
Yes, whatever the vote is, there will be a vote of confidence. New Democrats will be voting against this government for an election where Canadians will have a choice. The Liberals have let you down. They've let you down again and again. It doesn't matter who the leader is. The Liberals have let you down. They do not deserve another chance.
So, if Jagmeet is true to his word, which is not something anyone should ever believe in, there should be an election called in late March, provided that the Bloc doesn't flip on their promise either. However, I don't see why the Bloc would do that, because as it stands right now, the polls say the Bloc will form the official opposition, and their position in the polls is unlikely to ever be any stronger than it is right now. But the bad news here is that Trudeau hasn't technically resigned yet. In a short video from Calibre, he very clearly says that Trudeau won't be able to weasel his way out of this one, and that his days as the leader of the Liberals were numbered the moment he made his announcement to resign. But at the end of the day, he will remain Prime Minister until his replacement is found. His two most likely replacements, at least in my opinion, are Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. And neither of them are good options, not for the Liberals and certainly not for Canada. Freeland was front and center complicit in every decision Trudeau has made in the last 9 years, and Mark Carney has strong connections to the WEF, which somehow might actually not be his most damning secret, as it appears he may also have strong connections to another controversial figure. But it's worth noting that, so far as I'm aware here, at least as of the time of recording, neither of these individuals have placed an official leadership bid. And I don't know that either of these individuals want to be a punching bag during an election that they just can't hope to win. Bids must be placed by January 23rd, accompanied by a whopping $350,000, and the new leader will be declared on March 9th. Which means that Trudeau resigning really kind of doesn't change very much here. Whether or not he announced his resignation, and whether or not he prorogued Parliament, he was always going to remain in power until the next election. So, I mean, maybe that's a little bit pessimistic of me to say, but at least now we have a light at the end of the tunnel. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke to this resignation, stating her reasons for why she would have preferred an election to be called.
I would have preferred today to see an election call, because I don't think 2 months delay is going to make any bit of difference to how Canadians are looking at this administration. Why do we need an election? We need an election so that whoever is in the chair has a 4-year mandate. And so when we go to negotiate with the United States, there's some certainty about who the players are going to be at the table. So I'm a bit disappointed that we didn't get an election call today. I think that would have been the better outcome, and it would have allowed for the Prime Minister to go to the public and see whether or not they support his agenda of the last number of years. I think the polling results suggest that's not the case.
And she even put out a statement on X, calling this prorogation one of the most irresponsible and selfish acts of a government in Canadian history. And I would be inclined to agree. Proroguing at a time while Canadians are struggling as much as they are, and while economic and annexation threats are being made by Trump in the US, is an irresponsible dereliction of duty to Canadians. Which, I mean, frankly, that's rather unsurprising at this point, and that kind of sums up his entire time as Prime Minister. But this dereliction of duty might actually be challengeable in court. There are apparently a lot of valid reasons for which the Prime Minister can prorogue Parliament, and not all of them are necessarily nefarious in nature, but some legal experts are claiming that this isn't one of them. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has already filed the legal challenge to this prorogation on the grounds that this prorogation was without a reasonable justification, and there is even some legal precedent to back up their claim.
That document was filed sometime this afternoon. And I would expect that hopefully we'll be getting going with that case on an urgent basis very soon. There's nothing inherently wrong with prorogation. Prorogation really is a temporary suspension of Parliament. And usually what that is to give everybody a chance to legislatively reset the situation. And that's normal. Yet that usually happens probably once every Parliament or so. However, where it gets tricky is that you can't have it done. You can't prorogue Parliament to avoid political trouble. That's really what it comes down to in this case. Our case is remarkably similar. That's how, anyway, we will argue the point, to the case in 2019 when Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Johnson at the time decided anyway to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks of the 8 remaining weeks leading up to the Brexit. And essentially he wanted to avoid scrutiny from Parliament. He wanted to avoid the tough questions, avoid all of the mess in the House of Commons that was happening at the time. And so ultimately this led to a challenge like the one that we've brought today. And the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruled unanimously, 11 to 0, that the exercise of the prorogation power by Prime Minister Johnson to advise, at that point, the Queen, to prorogue was unlawful. And essentially what the Supreme Court of the UK said at that point was that you can't, in the course of proroguing, you can't frustrate or prevent the ability of Parliament to oversee the government, to do its job, which is to oversee the government, to supervise the government. Because as we all know, it's Parliament that is the supreme body in a Western parliamentary system. It's Parliament, not the government. It's Parliament as an entire body that is actually the supreme body of the country. We're suggesting in the same vein that in this particular case, the Prime Minister has prorogued Parliament in order to really gain some political advantage here.
That video is 9 minutes long and it contains a lot more information than what I just showed you, but they're not alone in these claims. The National Post came out with a different story on this subject, and a bunch of other experts have come forward to say the same things. And I don't know enough about parliamentary precedent, and such matters are actually really hard to find information on, since a lot of this is apparently based on tradition rather than actually really being written down anywhere. But I'll be sure to put all of these links in the description down below for you to take a look at if you want to learn more on the subject. Although, if I'm being honest, I think this maneuver is a bit of a Hail Mary and it's probably unlikely to work. But overruling the prorogation in this instance would be the right thing for the courts to do, in my opinion. Parliament is not the government, and government is not Parliament. Parliament exists to keep the power of the government in check. If the government can simply prorogue Parliament because Parliament itself has become a nuisance to its power, then that is contrary to the reason that Parliament exists in the first place. Proroguing for this reason is inherently contrary to the democratic process. However, there is no shortage of examples in Canadian precedent where the courts have sided with the government instead of concepts, like democracy or freedom. And the court in this instance could very well duck the question by determining that Parliament was prorogued for some other artificial reason. But even Trudeau said in his speech that he needed to prorogue to bring down the temperature in Parliament. So I don't see how the courts would get away with the reasoning on that one, but that's hardly stopped them before.
We are right now the longest serving minority government in history, and it's time for a reset. It's time for the temperature to come down, for the people to have a fresh start in Parliament.
So, yeah, it's been a bit of a wild week in politics. Now, all in all, I think this is actually a pretty good development, all things considered. But at the same time, this was sort of the worst possible outcome based on the way things were looking before Christmas. Which is, of course, why the Liberals did it. They've obviously never been about what's good for Canada, only about what's good for them. But to end this video on a high note for us gun owners, I've got some additional good news for you. Part of the Liberal Party's implosion comes with a wave of letters from various MPs declaring that they will not be seeking re-election. And 2 members stand out in particular. Marco, the liar, Mendicino is out. He is someone who needs no introduction, and he spent most of his time in the political spotlight as public safety minister, lying to Canadians about anything and everything that Trudeau asked him to talk about. I mean, good riddance, I say. And another Liberal MP, Guy Hitching, is also not seeking re-election. Now, most of you probably don't know that name, so let me put it into context for you. This was the delusional politician lady who tried to claim to be a firearms owner by stating that she had an FAC and a 22-gauge shotgun.
I have a shotgun and rifle that I use for, and 22 gauge that I use for ptarmigan, moose, and black bear.
Yep, that lady. She's also not seeking re-election. So Hitching, Mendicino, and now even Trudeau are going to be out of a job after trying to persecute us for years on end. After all this, we've outlasted them all. Now, there's still no guarantee that things won't get worse before they get better, but this is the beginning of the end for them. And all we have to do now is wait for the dominoes to fall. All that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.